Hey, before I start, I just want to say if you're a K-pop fan like me, you already know this isn't just music. It's memories, emotions, late night comebacks, and moments that literally shape your life. So if you love content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which idol you're thinking about right now. Because trust me, this story, it's going to hit a little too close to home. I remember the exact moment everything started feeling off, like the calm before a storm that no one wanted to admit was coming. Because at first, it didn't look like a pattern. It looked like coincidence, just another headline scrolling past on my phone while I was half awake. The kind you read and think, oh wow, and then move on. Except this time, I didn't move on, because the headline said that Heeseung from Enhypen was leaving the group. And I remember blinking at my screen like it had to be a mistake, because Enhypen isn't one of those groups people talk about when they mention disbandment or instability. They're still young, still rising, still in that phase where everything feels like it's just beginning. And yet, there it was, official, confirmed, real. And suddenly, I was sitting there thinking about all the performances, all the stages, all the moments that felt permanent, realizing that nothing in K-pop is ever truly permanent. And before I even had time to process it, before the shock could settle into something I could understand, another headline dropped, and then another. And suddenly, it wasn't just Heeseung anymore. It was Mark Lee and Ten Lee from NCT. And that's when it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like something bigger, something shifting underneath the surface of the industry itself. Like the kind of moment fans look back on years later and say, that was when everything started to change. And I don't know about you, but when I read that Mark wouldn't be renewing his contract with SM Entertainment and would be stepping away from NCT activities entirely, it hit differently. Because Mark isn't just a member, he's the member, the one who's everywhere, the one whose voice is basically woven into the identity of multiple NCT units. And imagining NCT without him felt almost unreal, like trying to picture a song without its chorus. And then there was Ten, whose situation felt even more complicated, because he wasn't exactly leaving everything behind. He was stepping into something uncertain, possibly continuing group activities, but under a different agency, which somehow made it feel even more emotional, like a door closing halfway but never fully shutting, leaving fans stuck in that uncomfortable space between hope and reality. And I remember sitting there, refreshing my feed, watching fans react in real time, denial turning into confusion, confusion turning into speculation, speculation turning into something heavier, because once you start seeing a pattern, you can't unsee it. And suddenly, people weren't just talking about these three idols, they were asking a bigger question. Why is this happening now, all at once? And that's when I started digging deeper, because I needed to understand, not just as a fan, but as someone who has spent years watching this industry, loving it, defending it, and sometimes questioning it. And what I found wasn't a scandal or a sudden fallout or some dramatic behind-the-scenes conflict like people love to imagine. It was something quieter, something almost inevitable, like a story that had been building for years without most of us noticing. Because according to insiders, this isn't unusual at all. In fact, it's almost expected, especially for idols who have been in the industry long enough to start asking themselves a simple but terrifying question: what do I actually want? And that question, as simple as it sounds, is one of the most powerful forces in K-pop. Because before debut, everything is about survival, about making it into a group, about saying yes even when you want to say no, about fitting into a system that doesn't leave much room for individuality. And for a while, that system works. It creates stars, it builds fandoms, it produces the kind of magic that makes people fall in love with K-pop in the first place. But time changes things, experience changes things, and eventually, idols reach a point where compromise starts to feel less like opportunity and more like limitation. And that's exactly where the industry is right now, in this strange transitional phase where more and more artists are stepping back and asking themselves if the path they chose at 16 or 18 is still the path they want to follow at 25 or 30. And apparently, one of the biggest turning points is something fans don't always think about: contracts. Because most K-pop contracts follow that standard 7-year structure, the one everyone talks about, the so-called 7-year curse. But what I didn't realize until recently is just how much those renewal periods shape everything. Because they're not just legal formalities, they're moments of truth. Moments where idols have to decide whether to stay in a system they've grown comfortable with or step into something completely unknown. And for groups like NCT, where the structure is more complex and contracts can be longer, those decisions become even more layered, because it's not just about leaving or staying, it's about redefining what being part of the group even means. And when I read that Mark and Ten had reached that exact point this month, it suddenly made sense why everything felt like it was happening all at once. Because it wasn't random, it was timing, precise, almost inevitable timing, like multiple storylines reaching their climax at the same time. And then there's something else that honestly changed the way I see all of this. Something an industry executive mentioned that stuck with me, because it wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was just honest. They said that there are always members who know exactly what they want musically, but before debut, that doesn't matter, because the goal is to debut, to survive, to succeed as a group. So they compromise, they adjust. They fit themselves into whatever concept, sound, or image the company believes will work. And again, for a while, that's fine, because success feels worth it. But after years of performing songs you didn't write, concepts you didn't choose, and directions you didn't fully control, something starts to shift, especially for idols who have been in the industry for close to a decade. Because at that point, they're not just idols anymore, they're artists. And artists, by nature, want to create something that feels like theirs, something that reflects who they are now, not who they were when they debuted. And that's where things start to get complicated, because the system that helped them succeed isn't always the system that allows them to grow. And when I thought about Heeseung in that context, his decisions started to feel less shocking and more understandable. Even though Enhypen is still relatively young compared to groups like NCT, because sometimes it's not about how long you've been in the industry, it's about how clear your vision is. And the fact that he hinted at a solo album so soon after announcing his departure says a lot. It suggests that this wasn't a sudden decision. It was something he had been thinking about, planning, maybe even dreaming about for a long time. And that realization hit me in a way I didn't expect. Because as fans, we see the performances, the variety shows, the polished moments, but we don't always see the internal struggle, the quiet moments where idols are trying to figure out who they are outside of the group, outside of the expectations, outside of the identity that millions of people have attached to them. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wave of departures isn't just about contracts or companies or even individual decisions. It's about something bigger, something that's been slowly changing the entire industry, and that something is power. Because for the longest time, agencies held most of it. They controlled the music, the schedules, the image, the communication with fans, basically everything. But that's not the case anymore, not in the same way. Because now, idols have something they didn't have before: direct access to their audience through platforms like Instagram, through personal content, through the kind of connection that doesn't need to be filtered or managed by a company. And according to critics like Lim Hee-yoon, that shift has completely changed what it means to be a celebrity, because idols are no longer just part of a group brand. They are brands themselves, individual, powerful, and increasingly independent. And when you think about it, that changes everything. Because if an idol can build their own audience, promote their own work, and even generate their own income through things like sponsored posts, suddenly the idea of staying in a system where they have to split that income feels less appealing. And I'm not saying it's just about money, because it's not. It's about control, creative control, financial control, personal control, the ability to decide what you create, how you present it, and who you share it with. And once you have a taste of that kind of independence, it's hard to ignore. It's hard to go back to a structure where every decision has to go through layers of management and approval. And I think that's the part that makes this story so fascinating and honestly a little emotional, because it's not about idols abandoning their groups or their fans, it's about them evolving, stepping into a new phase of their careers, one that reflects who they've become rather than who they were expected to be. And as much as that hurts as a fan, as much as it feels like losing something familiar, there's also something kind of inspiring about it, something that makes you wonder what kind of music, what kind of art, what kind of stories they'll create when they're finally fully in control. And maybe that's the real reason this moment feels so big, not because idols are leaving, but because they're choosing themselves. And that's a narrative we're not used to seeing in K-pop, at least not on this scale. And as I kept scrolling, reading, thinking, one question kept coming back to me.
Louder every time. If this is just the beginning, then what happens next? And if you've made it this far with me, seriously, thank you. Because this is the part of the story that made me sit back and just stare at my screen for a while. The kind of realization that doesn't hit all at once, but slowly sinks in, piece by piece. Because once I started connecting everything, the timing, the contracts, the creative differences, the rise of solo power, I realized that what we're watching right now isn't just a series of individual decisions, it's a shift in the entire structure of K-pop itself. And the more I thought about it, the more it started to feel like we're living through a moment that future fans will look back on the same way we look back at major turning points in the industry. Because something fundamental is changing, and it's happening quietly, without a single dramatic headline to define it. But you can feel it if you're paying attention, especially when you look at how fans reacted to everything that happened with Heeseung, Mark Lee, and Ten Lee. Because at first, the reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Shock, denial, confusion, the endless "this can't be real" posts, the late-night threads trying to make sense of it all. But then, something interesting started to happen, something I don't think we talk about enough, which is that alongside the sadness, there was also understanding. Like, fans weren't just reacting emotionally, they were thinking. They were asking deeper questions. They were starting to see idols not just as members of a group, but as individuals with their own goals, their own ambitions, their own timelines. And I saw so many comments from people saying things like, "I'm heartbroken, but I get it." And that shift in fan perspective, it matters more than we realize. Because for years, the idea of a member leaving a group, especially a popular one, was treated almost like a betrayal or a failure, something negative, something to be feared. But now it's starting to feel more like a transition, like a natural part of an idol's career. And that change in how fans see things is actually part of what's making all of this possible. Because the industry doesn't just shape fans, fans shape the industry too. And when fans start supporting solo ventures, start following idols beyond their groups, start valuing individuality as much as group identity, it creates space for idols to make these kinds of decisions without completely risking their careers. And that's something that simply didn't exist in the same way before. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this isn't just about idols wanting more creative freedom or better financial control. It's also about timing in a broader sense, because we're in an era where being an idol doesn't mean the same thing it used to, thanks in huge part to platforms like Instagram, YouTube, and everything in between, where idols can build personal brands that exist independently of their groups. And according to critics like Lim Hee-yoon, this has completely redefined the power dynamic, because now an idol's value isn't just tied to album sales or group promotions, it's tied to their individual reach, their personal connection with fans, their ability to influence. And that's huge, because it means that even outside of a group, idols can still thrive, still succeed, still stay relevant. And when you combine that with the kind of income that can come from personal branding, like sponsored posts that can earn massive amounts depending on popularity, It creates a situation where going solo isn't just an artistic choice, it's a strategic one. And I know some people might feel uncomfortable talking about the financial side of things, but it's real. It's part of the equation. And for idols who have spent years splitting their earnings with agencies, the idea of having full control over their income is incredibly appealing, especially when that income is tied directly to them as individuals, not just as members of a group. And suddenly, the question shifts from why are they leaving to why wouldn't they at least consider it? And that's when things start to feel a little inevitable, because when multiple factors, creative ambition, contract timing, financial independence, and changing fan attitudes all align at the same time, you don't just get isolated cases, you get waves. And that's exactly what this feels like. The beginning of a wave that could reshape how we think about K-pop groups entirely. And I know that sounds dramatic, but think about it. If more idols start choosing to go solo earlier in their careers or choosing more flexible arrangements where they can balance group and individual activities under different agencies, then the traditional idea of a fixed group with a fixed lineup starts to become less stable, more fluid, more open to change. And that doesn't necessarily mean something negative, it just means different. But different can be hard to accept when you're used to things staying the same. And I think that's why this moment feels so emotional for so many fans, because it's not just about missing a member or worrying about a group's future, it's about confronting the reality that the version of K-pop we fell in love with is evolving. And evolution always comes with a sense of loss, even when it leads to something better. And I felt that personally when I thought about Enhypen continuing without Heeseung, or NCT without Mark in its active lineup, because those changes don't just affect the music, they affect the identity of the group, the dynamics, the chemistry, the little things that fans notice and hold on to. And yet, at the same time, there's this other side of the story that's impossible to ignore, which is the excitement of what comes next. Because when idols step into their own creative space, they often reveal sides we've never seen before, styles we didn't expect, stories they couldn't tell within the structure of a group. And that's something that can be incredibly powerful, both for the artist and for the fans who have been waiting to see that side of them. And I think that's where this story ultimately lands, not in a place of sadness or even uncertainty, but in a place of transition. Because what we're witnessing right now isn't the end of anything, it's the expansion of what it means to be an idol, what it means to have a career in K-pop, what it means to connect with fans. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of an era where idols don't have to choose between being part of a group and being themselves, where they can be both in ways that weren't possible before. And if that's the case, then the departures we're seeing now aren't signs of something falling apart, they're signs of something new taking shape, something more flexible, more artistic-driven, more aligned with the realities of the world we live in today. And I don't know exactly what that future looks like yet, I don't think anyone does, but I do know that moments like these, moments that feel confusing and emotional and a little bit overwhelming, usually are the ones that matter the most in the long run, because they force change, they open doors, they create possibilities. And as much as I'll always feel a little nostalgic for the way things used to be, I can't help but feel curious, even excited about where things are going next. Because if there's one thing K-pop has proven over and over again, it's that it knows how to evolve, how to reinvent itself, how to turn uncertainty into something unforgettable. And maybe that's exactly what we're seeing right now in real time, through every announcement, every decision, every new beginning. And honestly, I think we're going to be talking about this moment for years to come. And if you're still here with me, I just want to say thank you for sharing this moment, because being a K-pop fan means feeling everything a little more deeply. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this is a good change, or does it worry you? Drop your opinion in the comments, and if you want more deep dive K-pop stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story, it's far from over.